The obelisk screamed awake. Light tore through the sand, casting the ruins in shimmering rings as gravity shuddered. "Who activated it?" someone shouted. But Aisha Mbai already knew the answer. The moment her hand left the stone, the relic dimmed, all but one glowing rune hovering stubbornly in the air, pointing straight at her. 3 hours earlier, the dropship hummed as it descended toward the cracked basin of Thalos. Through the scratched viewport, dunes rippled in layers of blood red and rust, dust storms crawling across the horizon like sluggish titans. The ancient ruins below flickered under the shimmer of heat distortion. Aisha Mbai adjusted her seat harness and peered through the heat haze, her eyes narrowing. She had seen ruins before, but nothing like this. The shuttle touched down with a muted thump. As the hatch hissed open, the baking heat hit like a tidal wave. Aisha stepped into it with the grimace of someone used to discomfort. Her boots sank slightly into the reddish grit. The wind smelled of scorched iron and ozone. Dr. Krillin Hesht, the expedition director, waited near the base of the ramp. A member of the Grenth species, his bipedal exosuit gleamed too brightly against the dusty landscape. Multiple optical nodes on his head flicked toward her in sequence. "Surveyor Mbai, welcome to Thalius," he said with precise formality. "Please be aware this is a mixed species site. Protocols must be followed. Touch nothing without clearance." Aisha gave him a lopsided smile. Wouldn't dream of it. Behind her, the rest of the joint expedition team disembarked, a mix of humans, Kirene, Seltari, and a few silent observers from the insectoid Viral delegation. Equipment crates hovered behind them on anti-grav pads, trailing the team like obedient dogs. The obelisk of Karsun towered ahead, partially framed by the broken arch of some long collapsed structure. It was impossible black, a shade so absolute it seemed to absorb the very sunlight that struck it. Patterns were etched across its surface, so faint they could be mistaken for the natural weathering of stone. But they weren't random, not to Aisha. She trailed behind the others, letting the scientists debate their activation theories and bicker over sensor placements. She had read all the files on the flight out. No readings, no emissions. Thousands of scans had produced thousands of blank slates. The obelisk resisted every attempt to define it. Still, she noticed things, tiny things. The sand directly beneath the obelisk was more compacted than anywhere else in the basin, as if the monument pressed reality downward just by existing. Her handheld thermal scanner displayed uneven heat signatures that didn't match solar exposure. Oddest of all, there was a sound. No, not a sound, more a sensation, like a barely perceptible hum in the meat of her bones. Faint, irregular, almost like a distant heartbeat. She tried to mention it during the midday check-in. "Residual equipment vibration," Dr. Hesht replied curtly. "Biological misperception. The human vestibular system is notoriously unreliable." Aisha bit back the obvious reply. She didn't need a lecture on human biology from someone who reproduced via airborne spore exchange. She simply nodded and went back to work. The expedition set up in a flurry of efficiency. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping with millimeter precision. Plasma readers aligned in a grid around the obelisk's base, while a Seltari technician adjusted a harmonic resonator the size of a dinner table. Nearby, 2 Kirene debated over calibration units, arguing whether the last pulse they fired had been too high frequency. "The thing is inert," one grumbled. "Dead rock." "Dead things don't hum," Aisha muttered. No one responded. They didn't hear it. She waited until the heat drove most of the crew into the shade of the domes for their hydration cycles. Her hand itched. She walked alone toward the obelisk. Wind tugged at the collar of her field suit. Aisha paused just short of the caution perimeter, a ring of half-buried sensors that beeped lazily at her approach. The black monument loomed above her like a frozen shadow. Its surface was too smooth to be natural, too chaotic to be manufactured. She stepped closer, one foot crunching over a fractured tile. The hum intensified. She could feel it in her fingertips now, like an invitation, like recognition. "Mbai, back away from the obelisk." Dr. Hesht's voice crackled through her comm. "That artifact is classified as non-responsive, but potentially volatile." She ignored him. Her hand rose slowly, breath caught in her throat. She touched the stone. It was warm. In the same instant, everything changed. Runes flared to life beneath her palm, tracing out from her touch like ripples across a still pond. A surge of blue-white light exploded outward. The ground vibrated, The sand lifted around her in floating ribbons, spiraling upward in defiance of gravity. Every drone within 50 meters overloaded. Screens went dead. Alarms screamed from the control domes. The obelisk sang, not with sound, with force, with pressure, with intention. Aisha stood still, rooted to the spot as light engulfed her. It coursed up her arm, across her chest, her spine, down into her heels. The hum in her bones became a thunder. Her vision blurred, then sharpened as the air split apart above the obelisk, revealing a vast, slowly rotating projection. A map? No, a star chart. It stretched in all directions, impossible in scope. Galaxies bloomed in fractal spirals. Coordinates shifted and reformed. Layers folded and collapsed in real time, rendering known space like a flicker in a vast sea. And then, the entire display narrowed. It focused. A single point blinked. An uncharted system outside every known navigational database. The chart held steady, highlighted, chosen. Behind her, the rest of the expedition finally arrived in a stumbling panic. Armed drones hovered protectively. Technicians scrambled to reactivate scanners. No one dared approach the obelisk. Dr. Hesht shouted, "Step away from it, now!" Aisha complied, slowly pulling her hand back. The moment her skin broke contact, the obelisk dimmed. The runes faded. The light collapsed inward. The floating map disappeared like mist in sunlight. The hovering sand fell all at once, pattering against the ground. All except one thing. One rune remained, floating just above the stone, glowing, waiting. Aisha turned to face the team. Faces stared back in disbelief, some with awe, others with fear. No one said a word. Dr. Hesht stepped forward, his voice more cautious than angry now. "What did you do?" She looked down at her palm, then up at the silent monument. "I touched it." Someone cursed behind him. Another whispered about cognitive biometric triggers. One of the Kirene muttered, "It chose her." And maybe it had. Because in all the decades this relic had waited, buried and silent, it had responded to nothing. Until now. Until her. The desert didn't settle. It only paused. Long after the obelisk dimmed, the wind carried fine, disturbed sand in uneasy spirals across the site. The hovering rune remained. It glowed with an impossible steadiness, suspended in air a full meter from the surface, casting an ethereal blue shimmer onto the stunned faces gathered below. No one moved at first. Aisha Mbias stood at the center of it all, sweat cold on her back, mouth dry, fingertips still tingling. Her breath came slowly now, but her heart hadn't stopped pounding since she felt the obelisk thrum back at her. It hadn't attacked, it hadn't warned. It had simply responded as if it had been waiting, watching, holding its breath across centuries of silence. For her, Dr. Hesht regained control of his voice before anyone else did. Contain the perimeter, shut down all secondary sensors, bring the artifact drones back online, and someone escort Mbaye to the medical dome. Now. Aisha blinked. "I'm not injured." "You made direct contact with an active relic of unknown function and high energy output," he said, his words clipped and even. "You're exhibiting signs of internal resonance. You're going to med. Now." The team still hesitated. It wasn't insubordination, it was disbelief. An unspoken question hung in the air like a static charge. What just happened? And why her? A Varal attendant finally stepped forward, careful to avoid the glowing rune. Its movements were fluid, slow, precise as if the very act of approaching Aisha was dangerous. "I can walk," Aisha said, brushing sand off her sleeves. She turned from the obelisk with effort. It felt like walking away from something ancient and alive. The weight of its attention hadn't lifted. She could still feel it, just beneath her skin, like the relic was remembering her, or learning her. The medical dome smelled of sterile fabric and recycled oxygen. Aisha sat on the diagnostic bench as the med assistant, a quiet Celtari with translucent skin, ran biofield scans from several angles. The tools beeped softly, one by one. "No structural damage," he murmured, looking over the results. "Cardiovascular normal. No neuro overload. You do have mild electrolyte imbalance and acute adrenal spike, but that's expected. Nothing critical. So I'm fine?" The Celtari's eyes flicked toward her. "You're responsive. The machines know you're here. That's not normal. He tapped the scanner again. A strange low note echoed faintly through the dome. His face tightened. I can't filter it, he added, tapping again. There's a persistent background frequency. It's not from you, but it's anchored to you. Aisha felt her chest tighten. What does that mean? He didn't answer. By the time she returned to the central site, the mood had changed. The others didn't stare anymore. They watched. That was worse. The obelisk was unchanged, tall, silent, unmoving. But the rune still hung in the air like a waiting question. Dr. Hesht stood just inside the perimeter, speaking in low tones to a Kyrene linguist who shook his head repeatedly. They're not symbols, he insisted. We thought they were runes, but that projection was anatomical, neural, almost biological. From what species? Hesht asked. The linguist glanced at Aisha as she approached. Then back to Hesht. Human. No one said anything for a moment. Aisha folded her arms. So what now? I touched it. It reacted. End of mystery, right? Hesht didn't respond right away. Then he turned, his voice professional, but tightly controlled. This is no longer a passive site. The obelisk is active, responsive, and exhibiting selective behavior. Protocol dictates that we isolate the source of the activation. That's you. You want to quarantine me? Aisha asked, half joking. I want to understand why you're different. A voice broke in from the far side of the perimeter. You won't find the answer in her blood. The speaker was a tall, silver-skinned Yavari observer who hadn't spoken once since landing. She stepped into the center ring with her arms behind her back, gaze fixed on the rune. This isn't biological, it's conditional. The obelisk is responding to patterns, maybe cultural, maybe neurological. It doesn't just detect humans, it accepts them. Dr. Hesht bristled. That's speculative nonsense. No artifact from the precursor arcana has ever responded to humans until now. Or maybe we just never noticed, the Yavari said softly. Aisha walked back toward the obelisk. No one stopped her this time. The floating rune pulsed slightly as she approached, almost like recognition. I think it left a message, she said aloud. You're not a translator, Hesht said. No, she replied, stopping just before the rune. But I know how to read pressure lines in stone. Stress fractures, fault tension, patterns that repeat until something finally gives. Of God Makatli, she pointed at the rune's motion. It's not language, it's instruction. She reached out again. Gasps rose behind her, but this time she didn't touch the obelisk itself. Her fingers hovered inside the floating rune, the glowing lines curling like smoke around her skin. She moved slowly, carefully, not quite sure what she was doing. The rune brightened, then split. Light spilled outward in perfect symmetry, forming a flat plane just above the sand and interface. It resembled a field projection, but had no visible emitter. Glyphs spun around her, but not as a code. They changed shape as she shifted her stance. It's responding to proximity, she murmured, not commands. Orientation. A symbol stabilized in front of her. It looked like a spiral collapsed into a point, the same coordinate from the star chart. A soft tone echoed. The interface blinked once. A new symbol appeared simpler. A pathway. A vector. It's giving us a destination, she said quietly. It's not finished. Dr. Hesht stepped closer, slower this time. This site is no longer under standard research protocol, he said. We're elevating to galactic priority status. The Council will dispatch high-level xenolinguists and precursor analysts. This artifact just shifted from an archaeological curiosity to a navigational relay. Possibly an invitation, possibly a trap. But I'm the key, Aisha said plainly. He didn't deny it. By evening, the entire site was under lockdown. No new tests were permitted. The obelisk remained silent but didn't power down. The hovering rune pulsed at steady intervals, like a beacon. That night, Aisha sat alone in her dome, staring at a blank monitor. The obelisk had shown her something. She didn't understand it yet, but she couldn't shake the feeling it had given her a choice. The desert was silent outside, but the hum returned soft, regular, buried deep in the bones of her hand. She opened her palm and stared at it. The obelisk had spoken in light, motion, and gravity, and it had not said goodbye. It had said, follow. She didn't know where yet, but somewhere beyond the edge of known space, a path had just opened, and it had chosen her to walk it. The stars above Thalius shifted slowly in their dance, but Aisha barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to the point in space the obelisk had shown her, blinking like a memory she hadn't known she carried. That single coordinate hovered in her thoughts, replacing sleep, hunger, even the burn of the ever-present desert heat. It didn't feel like a discovery. It felt like a summons. By the time the council delegation arrived, the camp had transformed from an expedition site into a secured outpost. Shuttles formed a half-circle perimeter. Security towers watched from every angle. Sensor nets covered the ruins, and 2 orbital cruisers hovered far above, cloaked but unmistakably present. Aisha found herself tested daily. Blood work, neurological scans, resonance mapping, even dream monitoring. They asked questions she couldn't answer about sensation, intuition, instinct. One human psychologist asked whether she believed the obelisk had spoken to her. She told him yes. He hadn't written anything down after that. By the 4th day, the atmosphere shifted again. A new ship arrived, sleek, black, unmarked. From it, disembarked someone unlike the others. Human, but only just. Tall, pale, precise in movement. He wore a neutral gray uniform with no insignia and greeted no one. He came straight for Aisha. She sat near the obelisk, not touching it, but watching the floating rune that still hovered, as if time had forgotten to move it. "I'm Director Halden Marr," the man said, his voice unassuming but absolute. "Council Division of Xeno Interface Research." "Didn't know we had one of those," Aisha said. "We didn't. Not until yesterday." He didn't offer a hand. Just stood beside her, observing the rune with analytical detachment. "You're not the first human to make contact with an alien construct," he said quietly. "But you're the first to activate one the rest of the galaxy gave up on." Aisha raised an eyebrow. "Lucky guess? Possibly. Or it could be cognitive pattern alignment, neural map compatibility, archaeopsychic priming. We don't know yet." She stared at him. "So basically, you're guessing too." Marr didn't smile. "You're the only consistent variable, and the only one it responds to." He turned to face her directly. "We need you to follow the coordinate." That stopped her breath. She had expected more delay, more doubt, more bureaucratic mud. Not this. "Just like that?" she asked. "You're putting me on a ship and sending me after a ghost beacon?" "No, we're putting you in charge of the mission." Silence stretched between them. Aisha stood slowly. Her muscles ached from sitting so long in desert heat. "I'm a field geologist. I didn't ask to be in charge of anything." "Then consider this a discovery expedition. You'll lead a small team. You'll have full authority on site. The coordinate is in uncharted space. There are no known warp lanes, no cultural claims, nothing that should exist out there, but something does. We believe the obelisk was built to guide someone to it." "Someone like me," Aisha said. Marr gave a shallow nod. "Exactly like you." By the time the mission was approved, everything moved too fast. The ship they gave her wasn't military, at least not visibly. It was long, narrow, armored in obsidian ceramic plate, with a sublight rig capable of extended-range jumps and experimental sensor arrays not found on commercial vessels. Its name, pre-printed on its hull, was Ser Andres, a poetic name from an old Earth dialect meaning to cross into silence. Her crew was minimal, 5 total. A Varal engineer named Hesk, who didn't speak unless required. 2 council envoys, one Kirin, one Yavari, who watched more than they talked and never sat facing the same direction twice. And a human pilot, Lieutenant Marin Osei, former scout for fringe sector mapping missions. Aisha met her in the launch bay during final prep. Marin chewed on a data stick and leaned against the hull with casual ease. "So," she said, "you're the relic whisperer." Aisha laughed under her breath. "Is that what they're calling me now?" "Just a guess. You look like you're thinking too much to be military, which is good. Ships like this, you want thinkers, not shooters." They launched the next day. The jump to the coordinate took 3 full cycles, each passing through increasingly unstable warp corridors. The further they moved from known space, the stranger the readings became. Temporal drift increased. Gravity fields warped without sources. At one point, a sensor picked up background radiation frequencies, shaped like rhythmic patterns, possibly structured data, possibly random noise. On the 4th day, they dropped out of warp at the edge of nothing. No stars, no planets, just a vast black plane that seemed to resist sensor penetration. It wasn't a nebula. It wasn't a void. It was something else. Marin ran a full scan. Nothing reflected back. It's like something's eating the signal, she muttered. Even background cosmic noise cuts off here. Hesk made a noise behind them, a series of low-pitched clicks. Then, for the first time in the entire mission, he spoke aloud. It's not nothing. It's compression. Aisha turned. Compression of what? Space, he said. Time. Memory. This is not empty. This is containment. The obelisk's coordinate pulsed again on the nav display. A single point, directly ahead. They inched forward. 10 kilometers in, the field warped. Light twisted. Marin gripped the controls as the hull groaned slightly. The sky ahead changed. And something appeared. A structure massive, silent, ringed in fractal geometry that defied classical design. It looked grown, not built. Metallic in places, translucent in others. It pulsed with dim, slow lights that flickered like ancient heartbeats. They had found something, but not ruins. Something still alive. The ship's systems flickered. And then, every screen displayed the same symbol, the rune, the same one that had hovered above the obelisk. Only this time, it wasn't glowing. It was opening. A hatch on the alien structure began to rotate, unlocking with spiraling layers of light. A path formed ahead of them, silent, pressurized, waiting. Aisha stood slowly. It's a door, she whispered. Marin didn't ask if she was sure. She simply said, pressure is holding. Airlock stable. You want the suit? No, Aisha said, already moving. I think it knows I'm coming. She stepped into the airlock. The door closed behind her. Inside, the silence was complete. But something else waited in that silence. Not a presence, exactly. Not a mind. A memory, projected in stone. And the first thing it showed her, etched across the walls of a chamber untouched by time, was Earth. Not as it was now. As it had been. Before humans had ever walked on it. The air inside the alien structure didn't feel manufactured. It wasn't recycled, filtered, or fabricated through environmental systems. It felt natural. Like the air in a cave that had remained sealed for 1,000,000 years. Heavy, still, alive with memory. Aisha walked slowly into the chamber, her boots echoing faintly on a floor that wasn't stone or metal, but something between. The walls pulsed with dull blue light, and as she moved, the runes that had haunted her since Thalia's shifted around her again. They followed her not like sensors tracking motion, but like a language trying to reassemble itself in her presence. The depiction on the far wall stopped her in her tracks. It was a globe, slightly distorted in contour, smoothed with time, but unmistakable in its proportions. Pale blue, white cloud streaks, familiar continental outlines, Earth. Not as it was now, but older, primeval. There were no cities drawn, no satellites or stations in orbit, just landmasses surrounded by deep oceans, the poles coated in thick, unbroken ice. The Earth from before writing, before tools, maybe even before speech. Her breath caught in her throat. A symbol pulsed beside it. Not a label, there was no writing, but a kind of tag. A conceptual pointer. One that had hovered over her ever since the obelisk awakened. The structure knew Earth, not as a myth or a data point. It remembered it. Do you see this? She asked, tapping her communicator. Static hissed back. No response. She checked the connection manually. No interference. The signal simply wasn't escaping. She was alone inside. A corridor opened at the far side of the chamber. Not by motion, but by recognition. She turned toward it, compelled not by curiosity now, but by something deeper. The structure wanted her to see something else. She followed. Each room she passed through showed new projections. They weren't images. They were memories, rendered in impossible materials and shifting light. A forest of immense trees, unlike any on Earth today, stretching into violet skies. A moon, Thalius. Seen from space, its surface glowing faintly with internal patterns, stars flickering in coded sequences, aligning themselves into spirals that pulsed with meaning just beyond human comprehension. And then, finally, a chamber with no lights at all, only silence. At its center was a platform, low and wide. Upon it rested something Aisha hadn't expected, a humanoid skeleton, old, dust pale, perfectly preserved. It wasn't human, not quite, The proportions were wrong. Longer limbs, more vertebrae, a different skull shape, but there were similarities too, just enough that her mind fought to reconcile what she was seeing. It was something close. Near the remains was a small object, a cube, no larger than her hand, with the same fractal designs as the obelisk. It pulsed faintly when she approached. Instinctively, she picked it up. Light erupted from the floor. She staggered back, nearly dropping the cube, as the chamber filled with a projection. A being stood before her, not a physical one, but a holographic echo. Tall, narrow-bodied, with semi-transparent skin that shimmered with light beneath its surface. Its face had no eyes, only a soft, translucent plane that shifted with expression. It raised a hand, and for a moment, Aisha felt a strange sense of calm. Then it began to speak not with sound, but with sensation. A kind of pressure against her thoughts, gentle but insistent, like it was trying to bypass language and speak in memory instead. She didn't understand words. But she understood intention. What followed was not a message. It was a story. The obelisks were not warnings. They were guides. The species that built them, whoever they were, had traveled the stars not through war or conquest, but through resonance. They sought places that felt familiar, not geologically or atmospherically, but spiritually. They had found Earth, or perhaps a proto-Earth, a place rich in something they valued beyond all else, potential. Aisha saw flashes of oceans, storms, early creatures crawling across land. The builders had walked those ancient shores. They had watched, they had waited, and then they had left. Not because they were driven out, but because they chose to. Earth had been their last resonance, their last chosen world before their extinction or departure. And they had left behind the obelisks not as tombstones, but as messages. Not to their own kind, to whoever came next. You. Aisha stumbled as the vision faded. Her knees hit the floor. The cube dimmed in her hand, and the chamber went still again. She breathed hard, sweat cooling against her spine. The structure hadn't been calling her specifically. It had been calling for anyone who could listen the right way. Someone whose biology, intuition, and emotional structure aligned with a pattern set eons ago. Humans weren't special, but they were ready. The path they had taken through fire, through fear, through space and time had brought them to a point where they could finally receive what had been left behind. Not technology. Perspective. She stood. The cube pulsed once more. This time, it didn't project a story. It projected a new coordinate, farther than before, beyond even this system. Another obelisk? A final destination? A network? She had no way to know. But the message was clear. This was not the end. It was the second step. The return to the Sarah Andrews was slow. The airlock re-engaged as she approached, and this time the structure did not resist. The door opened for her without prompting, as if it had given her all it had to give for now. Marin was the first to meet her, eyes wide. "What happened in there?" she asked. Aisha held up the cube. "We're not the first," she said, "but we might be the last." Dr. Hesht's voice crackled through the comm. "We lost all telemetry. Did you make contact?" "Yes," Aisha said. "And?" She turned toward the view screen, where the alien structure loomed still and silent in the void. "I think we've been invited to remember who came before us, and to decide if we're going to carry it forward." Later, when the Sarah Andrews turned toward the new coordinate, no one spoke. The stars stretched into threads as they entered warp. Aisha stood alone in the observation bay, watching the light bend around her. The obelisk had stayed silent for centuries. It wasn't sleeping. It had been waiting. And now, for the first time in remembered history, someone had answered.